All right. So, as we gather this evening, as I mentioned, we are here now at part four of this series called Transforming the Heart. In the first week, we briefly discussed the battle against pride, right? Just recognizing the symptoms of pride that may be within us. Sometimes pride is one of those things that just kind of creeps up within us. And so we took a deeper dive into what that looks like, how it may come about, and what are those signs that we can recognize that we can begin to address slowly in our spiritual life. During the second week and the second part of the series, we discussed facing ourselves and the mirror within, really looking into our innermost being and just kind of doing this reflection about who we are in terms of how others see us and know us, who we are in terms of what we know about us, and those areas where we may not know but others see, and then those things that are just still undiscovered about us. And so we were taking the opportunity to really just self-reflect and take a look deeper into our own heart and soul, because that is part of transformation, right? You recognize the wrong or the evil or the bad that is within you. Second part, you're really truly facing yourselves and you're face to face with that mirror. And then third was redirecting our inner monologue, right? Being able to have a better thought, or having better control of our thoughts, and being able to recognize those thoughts. Sometimes thoughts that are just negative, sometimes thoughts that are just bringing about anxiety or worry. How can we recognize those thoughts? And how can we bring our thoughts and our behaviors and our actions in a way that leads us to transforming the heart? So today is the last and final part, letting go and union with God. So I'm going to go right into it without taking too much time. And I wanted to begin this evening by asking you to reflect on the following two words. I've kind of put some pointers here just to give you guys some direction and some guidance of where it is that I'm going with this, but two simple words, words that we hear all the time, words that we have seen all the time: Christ and the world. Christ and the world. Take a moment to reflect on these two words and begin to think. If you were to just literally close your eyes and just think about these two words, what is the first image? What is the first thought? What is the first, notion that kind of comes into your mind when you hear the name of Christ? And at the same time, the first thought, the first image, the first notion that comes into your mind when you hear the word world and you reflect on it. So I kind of just helping you out in just a little bit by kind of breaking it down a little bit. So if you begin to think about Christ, most people think about the spiritual realm. When you think about the world, it's the physical. When you think about Christ, we know that he is eternal. When we think about the world, we know that the world is temporary. When we think about Christ, we always praise and we glorify him and we say, "Holy are you, O God, who is immortal." But we know that the world is something that is really temporary and mortal, right? There's an end. There's a period where things can fall apart and break, right? When we think about Christ, the notion that he is perfect, right? That he is without sin, he is sinless. But when we think about the world, it's imperfect, right? There's sin, it's broken, but yet Christ is complete. So I think as you begin to see the pattern, you can really add any word within both of these categories, right? Or within both of these sections. Take anything, any word that is positive and attribute it to Christ, and anything that may not be so positive or maybe the opposite is going to be tied to the world, right? So what is this pattern leading us to understand and leading us to see? Clearly, there is a difference between the two, right? Clearly, there is a separation between the two. Clearly, there's a difference between the two. And so that kind of leads me to this part of our discussion for today. When we say letting go and union with God, what is it that we are letting go of? What are we supposed to let go of? Are we supposed to let go of ourselves? Are we supposed to let go of our family? Are we supposed to let go of our communities? What is it that we are actually letting go? And most of the times, really, it comes back to this simple concept and image of Christ and the world, right? And think about two kingdoms, right? The kingdom of God and the kingdom of the world, right? Even Christ throughout the Gospels has really spoken to us about this, saying, I have come to the earth to establish my kingdom, to bring my kingdom. My kingdom is here, right? And we hear these words echoed throughout the gospel, and even St. Paul reminding us over and over. So Christ and the world. When we think about this idea of letting go, what is it that we are letting go of? Essentially, we are letting go of the world, okay? If you all think about your journey to Christ, and if you think about the disciples, if you think about people like Moses or just the Israelites or even Jonah and all of these individuals who we reflect on, we read about, we hear their stories, and we look deeper into their experience with God, and then we look at ourselves, there's a step that every Christian has to take as part of the letting go process, and that is what we call renunciation or renounce. Most of the times, the first time we hear this word, or the times that we often hear this word, is at the time of baptism, right? I renounce you, Satan, your deceit, your enemies, your armies, and all your deceitfulness, right? So what is it that we are renouncing? And what does it mean to renounce something? So Christians renounce the world. And before we understand what it is that we are renouncing in terms of, quote, the world, we have to give a definition to the world. The world is anything that is opposed to Christ and to our salvation. Okay? Anything that misguides you, anything that opposes you, anything that stops you from being in the presence of Christ and to our salvation can be attributed to the world. Okay? That's a tough thing to understand because, oftentimes we live in the world, we think about the globe, we think about the earth, we think about a place, we think about people, but really it's anything and all those things that are opposing to Christ and to our salvation. So when we renounce the world, we're renouncing something, and we're renouncing the world by living for something other than the world, right? If you're living for the world, or if you are continuing those things of the world, then you're living in the world. That you haven't yet renounced the world. And this is where our focus and our attention needs to be redirected. There's this thought in Christian life that the church fathers speak about, where they say that renunciation or renouncing basically is ultimately leading us to the goal of being Christ-centered and not world-centered, right? Christ-centered and not world-centered. And that's what leads us back to these two words, Christ and world, right? When you're Christ-centered, you're thinking about how to be perfect, you're thinking about eternal life, you're thinking about the spiritual realm, you're thinking about being without sin, but when you're in the worldly realm, you're thinking about just temporary. You're thinking about your sin, right? You're thinking about the brokenness of the world. And it's hard to see that, right? And so the church fathers saying that there's this step that we all have to go through, which is to renounce the world, anything and all those things that oppose Christ and our salvation. And really what they say is, as part of that process, there's kind of three key words. Number one is innocence. Just like a child who is born as an infant and in early stages of toddler, we know that the innocence that they have. What does it mean to be innocent? It means this sense of purity, this sense of just being able to live and not having this sense of guilt because you're living in this purity, right? You're living in this form of just living for God. And number two is abstinence, right? Abstinence is not something that we hear about in the world today. The most maybe during the Great Lent, our actions in our churches are talking about abstaining from food and abstaining from, watching movies and TV and trying to abstain in those things. But abstinence is more than just a temporary thing. Abstinence means really that decision and that path towards, hey, look, that is something that I am staying away from, meaning it is not part of me, it is not within me, right? That is what it means to abstain. And then temperance is kind of goes along with that in the sense of being able to have a sense of control over what we see, what we do, how we feel, and being aware of our passions and our weaknesses so that we can overcome them, right? So innocence, abstinence, temperance is all part of this process of renunciation. I wanted to just share these few passages for reflection. I know for due to the time factor and just limitations, we don't have time to go through everything in detail, but just some quick passages that you all are very familiar with. Christ said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And this is the yellow part where I've highlighted, it says, for whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. What does that mean? What is that leading to? It is this concept of renunciation, right? Renouncing yourself, renouncing the world, renouncing Satan, his armies, denying ourselves, right? So there's this process of renunciation. The second passage, this focus on Christ saying, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not from here, right? So where is here? This world. So clearly there's a separation between Christ and his kingdom and here and the world. Number three, Christ reminds us again, you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, right? And then lastly, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So when we're talking about transforming our heart, transforming our mind, transforming our body, what is the goal? The goal is we are being transformed out of something into a new being, into something else. So we have to take ourselves to a point where we are not going to say that we are of this world and that we are belong to this world, because we are being transformed. We are essentially coming to a point where we are saying we are choosing Christ over the world, right? And anything that the world offers does not suffice. Anything that the world offers is not going to lead me to eternal life, right? So it's that conscious choice and that decision to renounce Satan, his armies of the world, and to live for Christ. So that is the first step in being able to let go and union with God. I want to lead us to this second image. If you all, I don't know if I have the chat shared, but if you do, and if you feel comfortable sharing some thoughts of what you may think or what you may see in this image, feel free to share it in the chat if you are able to. If I don't have the chat open, I apologize. You can just go ahead and at least, reflect within your own mind and still be able to be part of this reflection. So when I think about, and you can also message me directly if that helps. When this image, when I grabbed it, people mentioned that they see chains that are broken, right? Chains that are broken, or maybe something in terms of a sense of breaking apart, right? Clearly, you see two things that were welded together or should be together. There's something missing, right? There's a gap, there's a space, there's brokenness in this. And so as I was thinking through, I thought about all the different points in here, and I thought about, a feeling of release, right? If you took it from a spiritual realm, in your life where you feel like you're just chained to something, if you're on the opposite side and you finally were able to break apart from that, it's a great feeling of release, right? It's a feeling of being released from bondage, of freedom. Think about slaves, right? And then when you think about the next part, we don't know how long these chains are, right? I've only shown you just a portion of this chain and portion that's broken. So one small broken link breaks the entire chain, despite how long this chain could be. This could be hundreds of yards, and this one small link that is broken basically separates it, right? Sometimes, like as I mentioned, one end can be seen as us and the other as God. So if God and us are united together in this chain, but then there's a break, there's a separation, there's a disconnect, right? Sometimes you can see it as two opposing sides, right? And the chain can continue with no end unless all ends are, and thus the ends are tied together. If you have a chain that just keeps going and going and going and going and is endless, the moment you tie and bring them together, bring those links together, you now have circles, something that's united all the way around, right? So why is it that I bring this image to you is because in Christian life, when we talk about letting go and union with God, not only do we have to renounce, but we also have to what we call detach. And when you think about detachment, I always think about a house with an image of a garage that is detached, right? Nowadays, we all have attached garages. But think about this word detach and engage, right? When you think about detach, you're separating, you're kind of broken, right? You think about the sins of the world. And really, what we're trying to get to in this step is that both detachment and engagement, it involves guidance and determination. It takes action, it takes effort, and it takes a sense of direction. When we talk about detachment, it doesn't mean that we just go and separate ourselves from the entirety of the world and we just seclude ourselves in a wilderness or a forest or a place where nobody lives. That is not the point of detachment, right? The point of detachment is if you're going to detach yourself from something, you have to attach and engage yourself with something else, right? So every time we feel that we are attached to the world, in order to detach from something of the world, we have to be able to attach and engage to something else, right? So this is where the concepts of spiritual life in terms of our prayer, our fasting, our discipline, if you're trying to detach from the world in terms of something as simple as eating food, right, in excess, if you're going to detach yourself from the excess of food, well, what are you supposed to engage yourself in, and how are you going to combat that? Well, on the spiritual side, we can use that discipline of fasting, right? We can detach ourselves from that, but then we can engage in increased prayer, increased reading of the scripture, increased dependency on God, right? So I hope you can begin to see how we went from renouncing to now detaching. And this is what the church fathers say, is that Christians must guard their hearts against yearning for what you have forsaken. Everything that you have just renounced, everything that you have just said, you know what, I'm going to let go of everything of the world, and I'm going to give my life for Christ, and I'm going to live for Christ, right? Well, if you've renounced and you've made that commitment, then there has to be the next step, which is to detach yourselves from those things. You can't just say, I'm going to do it and renounce it with your word, but then keep attaching yourselves to those things. There has to be this clear separation. There has to be that break. There has to be that detachment that takes place. And that is the next step in letting go and union with God. Not only are you renouncing, but now you are detaching yourself. And then the final step is kind of what the church fathers lead us to. But before that, I wanted to share a couple of these passages. The first being from St. Luke chapter 9, verse 62, where Jesus says again, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. What does that mean? If you have just renounced and you are saying that I'm going to follow Christ, I will, Christ says, follow me, and the fishermen, they got up and they're following him, right? At that point, if they've renounced the world and they're following Christ, there's no point and there's no opportunity to now look back, because then you're not fit for the kingdom of God. You're still attached to the world. You're still not have fully renounced the world in its truest sense. And the next passage, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 through 13, we hear St. Paul talk about putting on the whole armor of God, right? He says, be strong in the armor of God. Why? Because we are facing this true battle. It's like a sense of being able to wrestle against flesh and blood. Against what? Against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. So what Christ is reminding us, what St. Paul is reminding us, as I mentioned, is you have to guard your heart. You have to guard your soul. If you're going to be transformed, and if you're transforming that heart, there's a responsibility that comes with that. And with that responsibility comes this sense of being alert, a sense of being watchful, a sense of guarding your heart against those things that you might be yearning even after you have forsaken it, even after you have renounced it. So remember these two passages just as a reference. And then I kind of wanted to end with this third point of reflecting on this image. Consider the image and reflect on what comes to mind. Again, feel free, if you're comfortable, to share a direct message to me or to everyone, if you're willing, about what you see in this picture. What comes to your mind as you're looking at this path, this road, anything that can come to mind that you would like to share. Please take a moment to type out, and if not, totally understand. But I just wanted to give you all a moment to do some self-reflection, as if you're standing here and what do you see? I received a message that they say from someone that says, I see pathways, and really two ways, one leading to good and one leading to evil. Great. I think that's a great thought, and it's a great reflection in terms of the way we associate the world. Maybe there's one path to goodness and one path to evil. What else? Anything else that anybody else can think of or share? I see a couple of points where it says, reminds me of the poem, The Road Not Taken. Absolutely. I really love that thought where one path looks darker and then the other. I also like the thought where someone has shared the two ways, right? That it's not just one road leading to darkness, one road leading to light, but maybe those two ways could be leading you to the same path, right? So in Christian life, I think we find ourselves on this journey like this, right? And what I was trying to get at is two more words that I want you to reflect on: home and foreign. Home and foreign. Again, if you have any thoughts to share with regards to these two words and what comes to your mind, feel free to share with the group or even here to me directly. But as you think about these two words, what do you think about when you think about being at home? And what do you think about when you see or think about being in a foreign place, right? A home and a foreign place. When I think about my home, we all know that it's a place of comfort, right? It is the place where we know that we can be whoever we want to be. Why? Because we're comfortable, right? And it's our space. Somebody has mentioned that home is a place of shelter. Great. I mean, it's a place where we know that we can come back, we can lay our heads, and it's a place where there's a roof over our heads. Absolutely. Somebody had mentioned home is a place where you can see family. And when foreign is really this unknown territory, unknown land. I love the thought that someone has shared where home is being yourself, right? A sense of love, a sense of peace. There's no pretense, right? And then you think about the other side of foreign. Very few of us, and that's exactly right on where we're kind of scared. We have that fear of the unknown, right? No one wants to go into a foreign territory or a foreign land and feel like they're on their own. They don't know what to expect. They don't know which direction to go, which direction to take. You would rather come home, right? And so this is a very, very difficult step in the Christian journey and Christian life when we talk about letting go in union with God. And that word is something that you probably have heard, but the church fathers use this word exile. Exile. It sounds really scary. It sounds really complicated. But the Greek word xenitia basically means living as a stranger, living as a stranger. So when we talk about the word exile at a basic level and a basic sense, all we're saying is that we are leaving everything that we find familiar to ourselves. Okay? We leave everything behind that we find familiar to ourselves. And at the same time, we are leaving forever everything in our own country or county that prevents us from reaching the goal of Christian living, right? So as I mentioned before, renouncing, what was it? we're renouncing the world. When we're detaching, what are we detaching from? We're detaching from the things of this world, the things that are keeping us from Christ, right? So if you're leaving that, exile means you're leaving it forever. You can't just leave it for a moment of time and then come right back to it, right? And then, most importantly, here at the end, um, exile is a separation in order to totally hold on to God. It's like living like a fugitive, right? I don't mean to use it in that way as a fugitive of someone who has done wrong or anything like that, but this concept of totally separating yourselves from the areas of comfort, from the areas of home, and knowing that you're leaded or you're being led to a foreign place, a foreign land, which is the eternal presence of God, right? So as we think through these verses, I kind of wanted to highlight and bring some of these for reflection. So St. Peter, in his second chapter of his first letter, he says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us." I think this is a beautiful passage that reminds us where St. Peter says, basically, as foreigners and exiles, abstain, right? And what he's saying is, even in that moment, though people may not know you, though people may not recognize you, though it may not be a place of comfort for you, though it may not be a place where you are familiar with, there may be pagans, there may be false gods, there may be people who are worshiping idols. But even in the midst of that, what is the calling for us? To really be the light for those around us. Let others see the good deeds within us and lead them to glorify God, right? That is ultimately the purpose of Christian witness and ministry and gospel, is simply that others may see the good or anything that is good within us and glorify God. And in the same way, in the second passage, it says, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 to 34, "Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits," right? "Awake to righteousness and do not sin. For some do not have the knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame." So what does that mean? Evil company corrupts good habits, right? If you are trying to live your life for Christ, if you are trying in your simplest forms and you're diligently trying to increase your prayer life, you're trying to be able to come to church and to commune with God, right? You're trying to read the scriptures, you're trying to fast, you're trying to confess, you're trying to help others, serve others, and be humble, and all of those things, right? The moment you surround yourself with people who are not like-minded as you, what happens? It corrupts all the good within you, right? I remember when I was in high school, or even when I was in middle school, or there's this temptation that kind of surrounds you where you kind of have to pick groups, right? Or you kind of have to pick your crowd, and it makes it very difficult. But ultimately, you have to be grounded in who you want to be and who you desire to be. As someone like me, as an Achan, it's never easy, but I have to make choices, because as a priest, as being ordained and having a calling and serving the people, not only am I responsible for myself, but I'm also responsible for the souls entrusted to my care, right? And as I think about that obligation and that responsibility and that trust that is given to me, there is something where I can't be the one to surround myself with evil company and that takes out the good in others, or takes away from the good of others, or even takes away from the good in me. And this is where we have to make choices of the people that we hang around with, the people that we talk with, the people that we speak to. I'm not saying that you cut them off, but how can we enlighten them or bring light to them? Or how can we step away from them into a positive circle that will spiritually uplift us rather than bring us down in a different direction? I wanted to share these thoughts this evening again and just circle back to this thought of if you look in Hebrews chapter 11, there are so many people that we hear about, and we often call it the biblical hall of fame, right? You hear all of the people of the Old Testament where it says by faith Moses, by faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, and all of these righteous people of old. And one of the passages here that I think just always strikes my heart, it says, by faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. So, what is it that is happening here? It says, by faith, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. What does that mean? That even Moses was willing to let go, right, of all the treasures that was given to him in such a country such as Egypt, and being under the kingdom of Pharaoh and everything, and being surrounded, right? He forsook that. Why? Why? He was willing to even face death. He was willing to face those consequences. Why? Because he desired to see him who is invisible, right? That is the concept of exile that we're looking for. That is the concept of what it means to continue to live as if you're living in a foreign land, right? When we think back to the beginning portion of this part where I mentioned it's living as a stranger. Moses didn't go to Egypt simply to go be there as a citizen, right? He was leaving all that he found familiar, right? Forever leaving his own country, right? But ultimately living a separation in order to totally hold on to and to be able to lead his people of Israel, to the promised land, right? So to recap, as we conclude this portion of the this study series called Transforming the Heart, think back through the things that we have talked about over the last 4 weeks, right? Whether it be the battle against pride, facing ourselves in the mirror within, redirecting our inner monologue, and then finally we are here letting go and union with God. And when we let go and when we talk about union with God, there are these 3 steps that I wanted to bring to your light that the church fathers have spoken about as far as this ladder to be able to ascend to the place of God. And it's that steps, the first 3 that they speak about, especially St. John of Climacus and all of the spiritual fathers who allude to this theme, is to renounce, to be able to detach, and to be able to live in exile. And the combination of these 3, ultimately, what happens? It leads you to Christ, and it leads you to let go of the world, and ultimately it leads you to union with God, and thereby achieving that transformation of the heart. When you let go of yourselves, when you let go of your pride, when you see everything that is within you and you redirect your life, your thoughts, your purpose to Christ, you have achieved that transformation of your heart. And that is what we're striving for. If we haven't attained it yet, and if we're still working on it, that's perfectly fine. But you have to be able to at least be aware of it. That was what the disciples did, right? Where they weren't just transformed the moment they were called by Christ. They were transformed through those 3 years. And even until the resurrection, they completed that transformation. Why and how? Because they let go and they achieved that full union with God by giving everything of themselves. And what did they do? They didn't stay there in Jerusalem. They didn't stay there in the place of comfort. What did they do? They began to live in exile. They began to renounce everything of the world. They began to detach themselves from everything that they were comfortable. And they went out to the foreign lands, whether it be India or Egypt. Why? They were living as strangers, but strangers for who? Strangers for the gospel, strangers for Christ, right? And they were able to go to that foreign land, and they were able to influence people who had no faith, no belief in God, no experience of God. How? Simply because of not what they preached, but because of what they lived and what they showed. And if they are able to do that in a foreign land, think about what we have the capacity to do in our own home, in our own workplaces, in our own churches, by being able to renounce and to be able to detach and to be able to live as strangers in this world. And that is my hope and prayer for each and every one of us as we continue on the spiritual journey with Christ. And so just wanted to bring that to your attention this evening, and hope that is something that has been beneficial to you in your spiritual journey. I did receive a question privately that says, how do we live in detachment and exile if we have career aspirations? How do we actualize loving God more than father or mother or son or daughter? So what I would say is, having career aspirations, it really, the concept of living in detachment and exile does not mean that you let go of everything, right? There's an underlying purpose for this, right? If you have a career aspiration and that aspiration is triggered by, I want to earn the highest, paying job, well, then you have to reevaluate that purpose, right? If you have a career aspiration and say, you know what, I want to be I'm just putting out an example there, I want to be a pilot because I want to give people the opportunity to be able to fly around the world and to be able to travel and to be able to see the beauty of different parts of the world and be a part and a parcel for that, that's a different thought, right? Whether it be whatever career path that you take, the aspirations that are there, there's nothing wrong with that. But the point is, what is the ultimate purpose and what is the ultimate goal of what you desire for your life, right? It's not to say that the moment that you love your job more than God, there's a problem, right? If that is the only thing that's driving you and you have no desire for anything else or no time for anything else, no time to pray, no time to go to church, well, now we have a problem, right? Now, sometimes that may be situational, that may be circumstantial, where you're dependent on that because that is your survival, right? If you're living from paycheck to paycheck and you have no other option or choice, that's something that you have to do for survival, right? But at the end of the day, I would say detachment and exile, what I mean by that, and I hope has been clarified, is not to say that you give up everything that you desire or everything that you aspire for, but rather channeling it in a way that is pleasing to Christ and that is channeled in a way where there's a sense of direction and purpose for what you aspire for, right? You don't just go and aspire to be someone there because someone else was like that and I want to be like them. No, we want to be Christ-centered. When you become Christ-centered, the things of the world mean less to you. It doesn't mean much to you. But when you become Christ-centered, there becomes a different focus. A lot of times I always mention to people, I always love math and science. I've easily been an engineer or maybe something in that area, which I have a strong passion for. But when I looked at my life and I looked at my calling, I realized I can do that and I can do that great and I can serve that purpose and I could probably be a great engineer. But something that I loved even more was to be able to serve and to be able to minister to people. And so you begin to see where God leads you down that path, which is the path of ministry. Both can be ways to serve God and ways to serve the community. However, in this sense, when you talk about detaching and exiling, for me, there was not much that I had to detach or exile from because I was already living down that path and being led on that path through the people that surrounded me, the people that encouraged me, the people that prayed for me. So to me, it was much easier to be led to that direction because there was this sense of community and support and like these rails that were just guiding me in that direction for ministry. So it was much more easier, but that may not be everybody's journey. And so to the person who's asked this question, I would say to live in detachment and exile, and if you have career aspirations, what I would say is bring it back to the focus of being Christ-centered versus world-centered. Every time you have to make a decision, every time you have to think through your future path, every time you have to think about what it is that you want to do, it's almost like the little question of what would Jesus do, right? It's not so much what would Jesus do, but it's more of what is it that will lead me to that kingdom? And what is that will continue me on the path of Christ and not cause me to go astray to the things of this world, right? When you make so much money that you don't even know what to do with it, we have a problem, right? When you have and accumulate and accumulate and accumulate and you don't want to give to anybody else, we have a problem, right? When we are looking for jobs and we're looking for prestige, we're looking to build our resume and we start speaking about it pridefully and boastfully, we have a problem, right? But you can still do all those things without the pride, without the self-centeredness, without the sense of this is for me or for my family or being selfish. You can do all those things without that. And that is what the point of it means to renounce and to detach and to live in exile. I hope that has answered that question. If not, please forgive me. And I hope that I can maybe give an opportunity to be able to discuss that further if you would like. And I could share my number here at the end of the conversation. I see a few more questions. I know we're limited with time here as a past time, but I do see, why does evil come in that way? You know, as far as people who live spiritually and then they are suddenly dying, right? Or they're suddenly killed. And for detach things in fasting. So can you keep it every day of fast? See, the whole point of detaching is not to let go of everything in the world, right? Christ says, right, you are not of the world, but you are still living in the world, right? And so fasting, and the purpose of fasting is not simply to give up, give up, give up, and give up and say you are living in poverty. That's not the sole reason of fasting. The purpose of fasting is not just to give up, but to give more. Give more of what? Give more of yourself, and to be able to give more time to be able to focus on your spiritual life and your journey, right? Fasting, and especially from food, is just a small portion of our spiritual discipline that we can teach our bodies and our souls to do, right? When you're hungry, you're satisfying that hunger with the presence and with the presence of Christ and with his body and blood. A simple example: on Sunday morning, when you are receiving the body and blood on a Sunday morning, the first thing that comes into your mouth, and if that's what you desire, if that's what makes you to go to church and say, you know what, I need to start this week and I want to receive his body and blood, and I need him to purify me for my sinfulness, for my weakness, and bring refresh to me, that brings you a purpose. But then you can go the other way and live for the world and say, you know what, today I need to get a lot of things done, or you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and just eat breakfast and do all of this and be comfortable in the worldly life, and then I'm just going to go to church to fulfill my obligation. There's two different approaches there, and that's what we're trying to get at. Ultimately, living for Christ and living for world, there's a way of life, there's a pattern of life that is part of that transformation that needs to happen. You may have a time where you were thinking like this, and this is what was important to you. But now you're going to redirect your thoughts, redirect your heart, and redirect your mind to make that substantial change and choice in your life that will lead you to the kingdom of Christ and not lead you down into the pits of the kingdom of God. Okay. So I apologize due to the time, but I just wanted to go ahead and sum up for today, and thank you each and every one for joining us this evening. I know there are some more questions, and I hope that maybe we can do that, especially as part of killing and, why do good things happen to, or why do bad things happen to good people, is kind of some of the questions that I'm receiving. And maybe I hope that we can address that in a future session and give more focused time to that. So as we conclude this evening, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.